Chapter 4. An Inventive People. So people began to think up new ideas at this time in the United States history. And there was an office called the U.S. Patent Office where people could get a license from the government that gave them permission to be the only one making such an invention. During the 1790s, there was about 27 inventions recorded each year. But 1 century later, the Patent Office was recording an average of 23,500 patents in 1 year. Many of these inventions were just things that made minor improvements to existing machines. But there were a few inventions, such as the telephone, that created entirely new industries and greatly increased output in other industries. With the invention of the telephone, there was the new industries of copper and lumber needed to create the new telephones. With the invention of the refrigerated railroad car, it introduced the meat packing industry that could create food that could be given or sold to people far away. And with the invention of the internal combustion engine, it made the automobile industry possible. Now, one of the people that you've probably heard about before is Alexander Graham Bell, and he was born in Scotland in 1847. In early years, he was working on making methods of communication for the deaf. He moved to Boston and began working on an idea about transmitting the human voice over wires. On March 7, 1876, he received a patent for his new device, a telephone. A few days later, he was able to speak through his device. These were the words he said: "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." And it was the first time a telephone had been used. Next, we'll move on to Thomas Alva Edison. Edison is probably someone you've heard of before, and sometimes he's called an inventing genius. He was born in Ohio in 1847. He mostly educated himself, and he set up his own chemistry set at home by about the age of 10. When he was 12, he got a job on a train, and one of the things they told him was that he could set his chemistry set up in one of the empty carriages of the train. Unfortunately, he did an experiment while on the train that caught the train on fire, and that meant that he lost his job on trains. By the time he was 15, he learned to operate a telegraph, and by the age of 19, he was thinking about becoming an inventor. One of Thomas Edison's first inventions was to improve a stock ticker. He sold this invention and used the money to set up a shop. In the beginning, he was creating over 40 inventions a year for the next 5 years. Then he decided that he would create a bigger lab, and he hired 15 assistants to help him in his lab. They would turn out a minor invention every 10 days and a big one every 6 months. This was called an inventing team, and it's quite common today, but it was the first of its kind at the time. In the first year, he invented the phonograph, a machine that records and reproduces sound, like a record player. Edison also invented the electric light bulb, the storage battery, the moving picture camera, the first central power plant, and hundreds of other things that changed American lives. Edison looked for ways to make a light when an electric current passed through a material. And this is a story you've probably heard before, because Edison used over 1,600 materials to find a material that would work to create the light bulb. Eventually, he used a strand of thread coated with carbon and was able to make the bulb glow for 13 minutes. The electric light bulb had been invented. There are many famous quotes by Edison. One is that he said that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Edison believed that hard work is what would help people create the new inventions in the way that he had created new inventions. When Edison died in 1931, people discovered that they could not live without electricity. What people had been suggesting was that they have 1 minute without electricity throughout the country. But people realized that electricity was so important that they couldn't even turn it off for 1 minute.